have come to it. We have come to the finale. The two-part finale, of course. Episode 179 of this review series. And, of course, 180 to follow, as I will separate out parts 1 and 2. Of course, the finale, part 2, will definitely be longer than part 1, in my opinion. There's a lot more fun facts, a lot more trivia that I'm saving for part 2. But, hey, it took a little over a year. I mean, you know, life occupied other things for me, but I could definitely gotten this done faster. But we made it. We're here for the Seinfeld finale. We will, of course, talk about part 1 first. And a couple of, you know, like, couple facts I put down for part 1 to talk about, which we will cover that firsthand. So, guys, you ready? Let's finish up the series. Let's go. So, of course, it's very well known that Jerry Seinfeld, again, back in December of 1997, decided that he was going to end the show. Again, like I said back in the Chronicles, clip show reviews recently I did, you know, his thought was, okay, the show treated him well, so he wanted to treat the show well. And, you know, he thought the big thing was, you know, they were still climbing in ratings, but they were starting to hit the peak where it's like, they can't get any better. They're just going to sustain it, but they want to go out on a high note, of course, and not just, like, be in the same spot. So he wanted to end it at the proper time, which, of course, we hear from a couple people if they thought this was the right time, of course, or not. Let me see here. So we all know Jerry Seinfeld invited Larry David to come back to do the finale, which was exciting. You know, he wanted this to finish the way it started, but of course a little intimidating because it was, as a lot of the writers said, it was kind of like the old teacher coming back, and you know, things were done a certain way for 2 years whenever Larry left. Now it's kind of going back to Larry's way. So, good way to end it, but of course, you know, it was first it's like, oh boy, he's back. So of course, the idea, of course, that Larry David had came from, he heard of this Good Samaritan law in France, where, you know, the law is that, I guess, you can get arrested for not helping in some way with a crime. And of course, you know, then again, sometimes there's only so much you can do, but in this case, the main four were not just being bystanders, they were mocking what was going on as well. And basically letting what happened happen. So, of course, Larry David heard this law and it's like, oh man, this is something I can get in trouble for. Well, then he thought the same thing with the main four, and that's something that they could get in trouble for, and it could be a way of bringing back, you know, like, a lot of, like, you know, stories from over the years and be able to, you know, reminisce outside of a clip show, basically. Which, not bad of an idea, but of course, this finale did have some mixed reactions. I had a few mixed reactions to this too, with some, you know, continuity stuff and whatnot. But he just thought that it would be a great way to get everybody to come back and reminisce over the 9 seasons, which is, of course, what they did. So that's basically all the facts I want to share for part 1. We'll talk about more fun facts in part 2, of course. But so the show started up, and for the first time in a while, we had Jerry actually do like a stand-up routine at the beginning of the episode. Particularly because, again, Jerry stopped doing that because he needed more time to focus on writing once Larry left the show, that he didn't have time to focus on stand-up material. So that's why they took that out. But, of course, want to finish how they started. So they brought that back. I think the first scene was Jerry and George. The first couple scenes felt like a little bit of filler. Especially this first scene where, I can't remember, like, George was trying to ask to borrow like a bottle of ketchup or something like that. And he had a hard time getting out. Him and Jerry just discussing random stuff. It felt like a little bit of like a filler scene. There's a scene, of course, where Kramer dropped off Elaine, and he said he was going to go to the beach. And there was, which I'm going to talk about a lot, because there was a lot of deleted scenes in the finale, of course. Well, a lot of them being from the testimonies. But of course, there was a part they took out where Kramer basically asked them, you guys, well, because nobody else wanted to go to the beach with Kramer. But then Kramer was just like, in a deleted scene, was like, you guys don't think I'm crazy, right? Like, kind of like, something he's ignored for a long time, that people, definitely get the idea that Kramer is, in a different world or whatnot, but it's never really acknowledged. But of course, everybody's just like, no, not happening. No, that's not the case at all. When you realize, like, yeah, you are a little bit of a crazy one. But he also was saying something about, like, something's in the air. And something, sure enough, was in the air for what was yet to come, of course. And Elaine was trying to call some friend of hers named Jill. But it was never either a good time for Jill, or Jerry kept saying, this is not the proper phone call etiquette or whatnot. And whatnot. And that was Elaine's main story. Like Kramer's was him at the beach, and, well, an issue he had later on, because it's a typical thing they would have, and of course, it costed, unfortunately, it kind of costed them, their big deal that they're about to get from this. And Elaine's, of course, was, when the proper time was to make a phone call. Jerry and George, though, so they get back to Jerry's apartment. First off, George was about to go to the bathroom with the door open, and Jerry basically mentioned something about how, you shouldn't be doing that and whatnot. But while he was in the bathroom, Jerry checked his messages. He received a message from some guy at NBC. Jerry calls him back, and I guess he's the new president of NBC. He wants to have a meeting with Jerry and George about the Jerry Show from 5 years earlier. So, of course, they get in the car, and there's a deleted scene again where they were talking about Kramer saying something's in the air, and while they're driving to the NBC. Of course, they get there, and of course, they're kind of the same conversation they had, before they went in the first time. And then basically Jerry was like, they telling George, like, don't say too much. We all know George can say way too much. Of course, that was established recently also in an episode where Jerry told him he has to go out on a high note. Once he hits a high note, don't overdo it. Basically, which he would do. And George would tend to overdo it. Anyways, there were times he was teasing of overdoing it in the meeting, but of course Jerry stopped him. But anyways, there was a new president of NBC. And they were looking back on a bunch of old, pilots and whatnot, and wanted some type of like a water cooler, type show. And he sees he saw the pilot, and he doesn't understand why that they passed on it. And he says that he actually wants to go forward with the Jerry Show and do a 13-episode season. Which, of course, at first, they were all, of course, excited about it and whatnot. But then there's a deleted scene in the car coming back where George has, like, the same reaction that, Larry David had. 13 episodes. I can't do 13 episodes. I don't have all these ideas. I'm not a writer, this and that. Which, of course, they did, because there were scenes where Jerry called his parents to tell them, and then George visit his parents, tell them, but then his mom said, like, the same thing. Like, she doubted that he'd be able to write 13 episodes, and then Frank Costanza's like, you're going to ruin his confidence, this and that, and whatnot. But, of course, they're going to be getting ready to move to California to write the pilot. Kramer, though, came back, and first, Kramer's problem was he got water in his ear from swimming at the beach, couldn't get it out. And, of course, he's falling over while trying to knock it out, and, of course, he's, what's going to happen with me? Because, you're not going to be around all the time. And then Jerry's like, we'll be back, don't worry. It's just, here, just going to be out there for a little bit. And, of course, Kramer's like, once you go out to L.A., you never come back. He's like, what if it gets picked up? And then Jerry's like, nah, I don't think so. They're doubting it. Again, just so people doubted that this series will get picked up. Jerry, of course, called Elaine while she was on the phone with Jill. And, of course, hung up on her. And then Jerry had to tell her the big news. And then, again, now Jerry's saying how that wasn't the right thing to do to Jill either. The whole debate about when the proper phone call time was. And then, to make up for, putting this on the shelf for 5 years, NBC offered to give him and his friends, Jerry and his friends, a free trip to anywhere they want to go on their private jet. Of course, they had a big debate about where they wanted to go, but finally they decided they were going to fly to Paris. So they get on the jet, and as they're flying to Paris, though, George again can't keep his mouth shut. George again is going back. Remember back when they first were negotiating? Well, he was negotiating, trying to get a better deal for the pilot. And he kept doing all this Ted Danson talk. Like, George wanted to be treated like the next Ted Danson. Which, at this point, I guess Jerry said something like that. Ted Danson's past his prime or whatnot. But George hated the way the jet looked. He wanted something more luxurious. He claims this looks cheap. But he kept saying, Ted Danson this, Ted Danson that. And, of course, Elaine and Jerry told him to, just shove and sit down and just live with it. And George just being a big baby about it. Well, then Kramer again gets up, starts jumping up and down on the plane, going trying to get the water out of his ear. It still won't come out, and then he falls through the door and he messes things up in the control room with the pilots. And they basically start, getting some turbulence. They start heading down, and they all think they're going to die. And, of course, they start just yelling things out, like, this is not how it's going to end, this is how it's going to end, this can't be the case. And then, of course, Kramer's saying, here it comes, I'm ready, Mother Mary, glory, hallelujah. And then, of course, then one confessional gets out, but the other one does not. George hold on to the seat for dear life. He's like, Jerry, I gotta tell you something. What is it? I cheated in the contest. Why? What do you mean you cheated? 'Cause I'm a cheater. And then Jerry's like, well, all right, then I win. Or whatnot. And then Elaine was just like, Jerry, I gotta tell you something. And Jerry's like, I gotta tell you something too. You first. And then Elaine goes, I've always... And then I was going to be, and I've always loved you, but it didn't go through. But then they realized they were landing, they were going to be okay. Of course, they landed in some random town in Massachusetts. And the pilot, of course, says that they're going to fix some things up. They should be ready to get back on the jet, head to Paris in a few hours. Wanted to go into town and get something to eat. And of course, they were saying then they're debating about just going home and taking a real plane or whatnot. Just going back and forth and just already just ruining the whole trip. And of course, again, Kramer, can't, stop trying to get the water out of his ear. Well, then they're on the streets. And then they look over and they see this heavyset guy getting pulled out of his car, and a guy was trying to rob him. Kramer pulls out a video camera, which, okay, at first think they're trying to get evidence and be a witness to a crime. Well, instead, they started mocking the guy. Elaine made some horrible fat person joke and whatnot, and George was titling all that, basically, they said something like, it's a great thing about robbing a fat guy because it's less thing for him to carry, it's like, oh, they're doing him a favor, less money to buy more food. Not nice things to say at all. Which, of course, would bite them really bad in the butt in a long time. And this guy, who apparently the character's name is Howie. I didn't know that until I read, something on IMDb, but the character's name is Howie. Obviously knows them. So, obviously, there's an officer who runs out, and as the guy got mugged, was yelling out that he got he's saying that someone stole his wallet, this and that. Okay, I'll take care of it. So then, of course, he starts trying to figure things out. But then, of course, he looks over and he sees the four of them, and he arrests them all for breaking the Good Samaritan law. Which, of course, I just explained at the beginning what it was. The four of them never heard of that law before, which, of course, they thought was ridiculous. And, of course, while they're in jail, the four of them, they were just like, can you tell us, please, what this is? And then they explained, and then the officer explained, and he goes, you're the first people to be arrested in the whole country. That's such a great thing. And then they're like, well, we gotta get out of here. We have a plane. Oh, we're not going to be doing that. You know, it could at least, there could be there could be a. At first, I thought this would be just a small fine, but then there could be a fine. They could be prosecuted, and they could go to prison for 5 years. And of course, you know, that didn't sit well with any of them. And then, of course, Jerry gets the beep on the beeper. He's like, plane's ready. And of course, then George was like flipping out, you know, at Kramer because, you know, if he didn't jump down the plane, they wouldn't be here. He also was blaming, you know, the NBC people because he thought the plane was cheap. It really wasn't. It was a fine plane. But then, of course, this case goes like worldwide because it was stuff about it was appearing on Geraldo Rivera or whatever the heck it's called, saying stuff like, you know, how, like, you know, it was historic because it was like the first, you know, case to be, you know, trial that to be done with the on the Good Samaritan law, and people make a big stink out of it. Of course, though, the ADA, and I feel like one thing that kind of hurt my thing with the finale is the ADA. I mean, yes, you know, he was trying to win a case. It was a thing where he wanted to win that badly, so he went out of his way to pull all these witnesses, basically different, you know, guest stars and, you know, characters from the 9 years, to pull them in to, you know, kind of reminisce them, because he felt like it was going to be good publicity for him, basically. But then again, I still felt there were just some continuity issues with the trial, which of course we'll explain, you know, in a second. Well, actually, I kind of talk a little bit now because, of course, they need to get a lawyer. Who did Jerry call? Jackie Childs. But I'll say I'm starting to get a little too far ahead. I'll say that we get to part 2. But Jerry gets Jackie Childs to be his lawyer, and of course, he's never heard of the Good Samaritan law either. And of course, we see Jerry's parents packing up, and, you know, they seem to be calm and cool. She's like, oh, this trial could last weeks or whatnot. And then, of course, she packs cereal because she knows that Jerry likes cereal. And of course, when they get to the Costanza, showing them packing up, Estelle's like, what did we do? Did we do anything wrong or this and that and whatnot? And they start blaming each other for things as well. And then the episode ends again, because the ADA says that this trial needs to be based on character. So obviously showing that they want to prove that this isn't the first time they've acted immature like this. So the episode ends with the part 1 ends. You see like a bunch of people like in the Costanzas. Newman, which I forgot to mention a scene with Newman. There was a scene earlier in the part 1 with Newman where he was trying to, you know, trick Jerry and making Jerry feel bad to let him go to Paris with him also. But Jerry said no, and then finally Newman was like, let it off on Jerry and say, one day it's all going to come back to bite you, basically. And I guess this is Newman laughing because he's like, oh my goodness, it's coming back to bite you and whatnot. It's like he's like just laughing, wanting to see the 4 of them just rot in jail. And you see other people throughout the years, like you see Peterman packing up to go to trial. We saw Keith Hernandez, Mickey Abbott, Kenny Banya, the Rosses. Ooh. There was a scene in the second part that I'm like, that's a bit too far. I didn't something in part 2 I didn't like that had involved the Rosses. But a lot of other people that we haven't seen in a few years or whatnot. Putty, I believe, also. Well, we used to see Putty this season. But a lot of people who were just, you know, gathering up their stuff and heading to the trial. And like the characters say, you know, like the actors say, it was like a reunion. Like some of these guys I hadn't seen in like a long time. Like when we get to part 2, I think maybe the earliest, you know, witness that I remember that appeared may have been would be Mr. Bookman, the library cop, all the way back in the library. So again, it was quite the thrill for sure. But yep, that's part 1. That's part 1. There's a lot more to talk about, of course, when we get to part 2. And we'll get to that next time. We have one more video left in this review series, and it's part 2 of the finale. And of course, I'll give my final thoughts on the series, my final thoughts on how the series ended, on the finale and everything. Maybe mention some of my favorites, some of my least favorite episodes, but we're just about to wrap it up, guys, which will be next. So, guys, what are your thoughts on part 1 of the Seinfeld series finale? Make sure to leave the guys' thoughts down in the comment section below, and be sure, as always, to slap a like on the video, subscribe for more content on my channel, follow me on Twitter as well, at DemandAirboy93. Until then, guys, I'm checking out. I'll catch you next in part 2 of the finale, where, again, we will wrap up my Seinfeld review series. After 1 year of doing this series. The 1 year that Elaine, of course, was suspended, what was banned from going back to the Soup Nazi. And the 1 year, getting too far ahead of myself there. We'll talk about that next. So, guys, I'll see you next time in the finale. Catch y'all soon. Peace out, everybody.